leave us to analysis. Dear colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen, dear students, it's really a great pleasure for me to be with you today and have the chance to extend my greeting to you, to extend a word at welcome to the 56th annual meeting of the Societas Linguistica Europaea. It is also a great honor for me that I stand as the vice rector of the National University of Athens and address you on behalf of the university, the oldest higher education in Greece and the first university in the Balkan Eastern Mediterranean area. Medicine and the School of Philosophy are the fundamental studies at which included applied science and mathematics. Today, the National University of Athens includes 9 schools which offer 41 undergraduate programs as well as 224 postgraduate programs. There are also 2 undergraduate programs offered in one of the schools of philosophy under the title BA of Archaeology, History, Literature in Greece, and one of the School of Medicine which leads to a medical degree. Both of them are exclusively for international students. I mention our programs in English because I would like to point out that extroversion and international orientation is a very important strategic goal for our university. This strategy aims to promote the educational, research, and social work of the university and highlight its international character with the ultimate goal of a lasting and substantial contribution to the progress of science and society, the high-level education of citizens, and to the development of the National Kapodistrian University of Athens has long been dedicated to the pursuit of academic excellence and the advancement of knowledge. At the heart of our mission lies a commitment to internationalization, a vision that mirrors the diverse and interconnected world of linguistics that you as scholars embody. It's through conferences such as this that we strengthen our ties with colleagues from around the world, fostering an environment of cross-cultural exchange and collaboration. This gathering marks a pivotal moment in the realm of linguistics, a convergence of minds, cultures, and ideas that embodies the spirit of intellectual exploration and collaboration. As we embark on these days of thought-provoking discussions and presentations, let us reflect on the significance of our collective efforts. Our commitment, your commitment, to understanding language, its evolution, and its impact on society not only enriches our academic pursuits, but also contributes to a more interconnected and empathetic world. I extend my heartfelt appreciation to the organizers volunteers, and sponsors who have diligently worked to make this event a reality. Your dedication to fostering a platform for intellectual exchange is commendable and aligns seamlessly with our university's aspiration to be a hub of global engagement and collaboration. In the spirit of the Societas Linguistica Europaea's legacy of fostering scholarly discourse, let us seize this opportunity to not only share our expertise, but your expertise, actually, but also to forge lasting connections that transcend geographical boundaries. In closing, I encourage each and every one of you to make the most of this unique opportunity, to learn, to share, and to forge connections. Let's honor the legacy of Athens by engaging in discussions that challenge and inspire us, and by leaving this conference with a renewed sense of purpose and enthusiasm for the study of language. I wish you every success at the conference, as well as in all the future plans of yours and of the society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Karadimas. And as a next speaker, I'd like to invite our local chair of the local organizing committee. Give him a warm welcome, everybody. Associate Professor Nikolaos Lavidas.
So, dear colleagues, dear friends, on behalf of our Athens Organizing Committee, I would like to welcome you to Athens, to welcome you to the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, to welcome you to the 56th annual meeting of SLE. We have no words to express how happy we are and the honor we feel for having the chance to host the 56th annual meeting of the Linguistic Society of Europe, of SLE. We deeply thank SLE for supporting Athens' willingness and decision to host the SLE conference, and for staying with us, Athens, all these difficult years of COVID until on-site large meetings became possible again. So we could have the chance to meet you all here in person. I will not tell anything about what Athens represents, what Athens was in ancient times, about Athenian democracy, philosophy. I will offer some words, some thoughts on what Athens can be for the science of linguistics in Europe in the future. Athens can be a center for linguistics in Europe in cooperation with major other institutions in the Balkans and the other Europe. Athens already strongly collaborates with SLE, develops initiatives, supports, participates, adds its efforts in all significant attempts of SLE that concern linguistics, humanities, society, and people of Europe. Athens is also a central part of the CIVIS network of European universities. Athens, a modern center of university studies in Europe, demonstrates what a European cooperation means in terms of modern, almost experimental university studies, scientific projects, new educational programs in the form of summer, spring schools, blended intensive programs. Modern Athens is in the center of modern science, modern linguistics, modern developments in the society. We are all proud to be members of the Linguistic Society of Europe, of SLE. We are proud because SLE supports the scientific study of languages, the cooperation of linguists without any exclusion, of origin, language, theory, perspective of view, level of linguistic analysis. It supports all good efforts. It is open to all new developments in linguistics. It does not favor the one or the other approach. SLE also always supported young linguists, again, by listening to their ideas, their dreams, their plans, by including them in all decision-making groups and offering them a central role. All in all, SLE is a model society of scientists, demonstrating how scientific societies and communities of people should work in democratic, open, transparent way that essentially support languages, linguistics, European universities, and cooperation between universities of all continents. We worked really hard to prepare the conference. Not a simple task, believe me. But we have chosen teamwork, and we worked hard and collaborated for a so long period of time, developing an excellent group of cooperation with the Dean of the School of Philosophy, Professor Achilleas Chaldeakis, and Professors Kikini Kiforidou, Amalia Moser, Spiridoula Bella, Evangelia Vlachou. I would like to use this opportunity to thank them for the bottom of my heart, for being patient with me, for all my stress, for the tons of my emails and my anxiety. I would also like to thank our collaborators, Dr. Vasiliki Makri and our PhD candidate, Sofia Chionidi, and our great students, volunteers, members of our team. You will see them with their yellow lanyards and their green badges, always around and helping. They shared the dream of an excellent SLE Athens conference from early on, and were and are here by us always. SLE is a family. I don't have words to express my gratitude for his stable support and help to the president of SLE, Professor Arie Verhagen. Arie was always there in the time of preparations, offering solutions to any kind of problems and challenges. I think Bert Koenig very much. Bert inspired our efforts to become better and better, to feel that there is no end to improvement and only ways to achieve improvement. I thank Lachlan Mackenzie for dissolving all types of anxiety I had, and mainly for becoming a very good friend after all these years, actually, of cooperation. I thank Anna Kisiel, our SLE conference manager, who put incredible effort aiming at the success of the 56th SLE conference. Teamwork is the key word in cases of conferences with more than 600 participants, and we were lucky to have Anya 24 hours, 7 days a week available to answer all our questions and to help as much as possible. Our great thank you goes to all of you who decided to send an abstract, prepare a talk, travel, and participate in SLE Athens. You supported the SLE Athens conference. We hope, our aim is that you will become friends of Athens, future collaborators of the University of Athens. Athens is open to your ideas, to your proposals, to further scientific and educational cooperation. We are absolutely sure you will enjoy your time in Greece and Athens, and you will enjoy the high quality of SLE 2023. And Athens and the University of Athens will help you to create wonderful, happy memories that will last forever. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Nikos, and thank you and your collaborators, and we'll have more opportunities to talk about that at other moments during the conference. For now, I'd like to invite Professor Achilleas Kaldaegis, Dean of the School of Philosophy, to speak to us.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Dear Vice Rector, dear colleagues, distinguished guests. I'm delighted to salute the works of the 56th annual meeting of the Societas Linguistica Europa, SLE 2023, because this initiative, organized by both the Societas Linguistica Europa and the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, under the aegis of our school, the School of Philosophy of the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. This initiative, dear colleagues, is an academic event of crucial importance, a noteworthy scientific event, and in my capacity as the Dean of the School of Philosophy, I would like to welcome you in Athens. I would like to welcome all the participants in this very important event, very important conference. Specifically, this meeting provides a forum of high-quality linguistic research from all domain and subdomains of linguistics, as well as a roundtable of experts to discuss topics of special linguistic interest. I would like to take this opportunity and congratulate the members of the local organizing committee, especially the chair of the committee, Associate Professor Nikolaos Davidas, and the members of the same committee, my dear friends and colleagues, Spiridoula Bella, Amalia Moser, Kiki Nikiforidou, and Evangelia Vlachou. I salute once again the initiative taken by all stakeholders involved in this event. I congratulate all scientists participating in this creative effort and wholeheartedly wish great success to the works of this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kaldaegis. And now I'd like to give the floor to our conference manager. You've already heard her name, Anna Kisha.
Welcome, everyone. I am really happy that we meet again, this time in warm but beautiful Athens. This would, of course, not be possible without, well, all of you, but some people in particular. I would like to thank Nikolaos Lavidas and Evangelia Vlachou and other members of the local organizing committee, all the volunteers, for their enormous efforts that they put into creating this comfortable space where we can share our research. I would like to thank all members of the scientific committee for reviewing way over 600 submitted abstracts, and especially to the chair of the general session, Karolina Grzech, and Francesca Di Garbo, the chair of workshops. Special thanks to all those of you who took upon themselves the role of session chairs and workshop organizers for creating that so needed frame for our discussions. Two more thank yous. First to the SLE secretary, Bert Corneli, for his advice, timely quality checks, and all the work he put into making this wonderful app that you can now enjoy on your laptops and on your phones. And last but not least, to Lachlan Mackenzie, SLE treasurer, not only for the budget control, but also for his patience and responsiveness. Thank you a lot. And two announcements before I allow you to continue enjoying the conference. First, about the app that I've just mentioned. The moment you install it on your phones or on your laptops, it will not automatically update. So you have to check for updates either on our SLE information board, which will be next to the registration place, or you have to, well, reinstall it daily. And because there are quite some changes in today's schedule, mainly because of the problems with flights from the UK, I will quickly mention them in case you're planning to see any of those talks. So Matthias Urban today in room 2 at 12:30, that talk is cancelled. Also in room 2, Russi and Nishida on Spanish C and Italian C at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, room 2. Russi and Nishida at 5 in room 2, that talk is also cancelled. Then also in room 2, that's an unlucky room today, at 11, there was a talk planned about numberless countdowns in Danish by Nielsen. This talk has been replaced by Fontaine, Karsdorp, and Maniavakas from ecological to lexical diversity. That talk was planned at 4:30 today. It was moved to 11. In room 2. So quite a lot of changes in room 2 today. 2 more changes, not in the room 2. In room 11 at 12:30, there will be an extra talk, a talk that was planned a bit later in the schedule by Borja Herze on sound change. And the last change in the room 15, a talk at 12:30 on differential object marking in Old Catalan by Ribera has to be moved to a later date because his flight was cancelled too. We hope to plan it on Wednesday at 3 o'clock, but that is to be confirmed. So that talk, room 15, 12:30, will not happen today. Okay, thank you very much and enjoy the 56th SLE meeting in Athens. Thank you. And now I think we are ready for the presidential address by Arie Verhagen. That will be chaired by Magdalena Vrembel, who is coming now to us.
Hello, everybody. It's my great pleasure and honor to welcome you all to the plenary presidential address by Professor Arie Verhagen. Arie is Professor of Emeritus of Dutch Linguistics and Language, Culture and Cognition at Leiden University. He did his PhD in Dutch Linguistics at the Free University in Amsterdam, where he worked, as well as at the University of Utrecht. Then for 18 years, he held the chair of Dutch Linguistics at Leiden University. His research areas are very broad and include, among others, construction grammar, usage-based linguistic theory, language and cultural evolution, subjectivity, perspective in grammar and discourse, causality, stylistics, you name it. He has published extensively in manuscripts, edited volumes, journals, including such journals as Pragmatics, Cognitive Linguistics, Pragmatics, and Cognition. One of Arie's most recent publications featured 10 lectures on cognitive evolutionary linguistics published by Brill, which contain transcripts of the lectures he delivered at the China International Forum on cognitive linguistics in 2018. Arie has taught extensively different courses at various levels, ranging from discourse analysis, corpus linguistics, psycholinguistics, semantics, pragmatics. And he also taught courses at the Dutch National Graduate School of Linguistics, LOT. He's been a visiting professor at several international institutions, including the University of Vienna, Budapest, Debrecen, South Africa, Queensland, Brisbane. Arie's numerous academic services include the current presidency of Societas Linguistica Europaea. He was the editor-in-chief of Cognitive Linguistics, and for 20 years he served as editor of a major journal of Dutch linguistics. Throughout his academic career, he had many important administrative positions as well, including, among others, chairman of the board of the Department of Dutch Language and Culture at Leiden University, and chairman of the board of the Leiden University Center for Linguistics. Wrapping up, I would like to quote Dirk Gerhardt's words, as he wrote in his overview papers, an overview papers of 30 years of Arie's linguistic works. Quote, Arie is a scholar with relentless curiosity and irrepressible research drive. His inquisitive attitude and wide-ranging perspectives have allowed him to cover a broad range of topics, to enter into discussion with diverse linguistic models. Arie is not only a prominent figure within cognitive linguistics, but specifically one that has managed to bring functional and cognitive approaches closer together. And today, Arie will talk about scientific explanation and the unity of linguistics. Please join me in welcoming Professor Arie Verhagen.
Thank you. Sorry for the interruption. And thank Magda for her very generous and kind introduction. Well, as you can see from my title, it's a rather ambitious journey that I would like to take you on for the next 45, 50 minutes or so. So let me start with some motivation for choosing it. And my first motivation, I hope you can see it all in the back, otherwise there is still room here at the front, is intellectual. If I'm honest to myself, I invite you to think about it, I believe we do not really have a shared story to tell about the coherence of the whole field of linguistics and about the way each linguistic subdiscipline contributes to that shared story, not to our students or colleagues in other fields, and that hinders progress and interdisciplinary collaboration. Such a shared story is, moreover, socially important, I believe. Many of us share the experience that there are many misconceptions about language in society that can cause sometimes serious harm in the relations between people and between communities. But without a shared story about the field, we are never going to persuade the world that basic knowledge about language should be an integral component of general education, just as much as physics, chemistry, basic principles of those are, and so on. So it's these motivations that make it worthwhile for me to invite you to think about the question, what in general, so rather abstractly, but this may fit the school of philosophy where we are today, counts as an explanation in our field. So I want to start with the question how complex phenomena in general are explained. Basically, this involves establishing a relation between the complex phenomenon at hand and the properties of more elementary, more simple phenomena that the complex thing consists of and their interaction. So for example, we may say that we explain the properties of solids and fluid substances in terms of the properties of molecules and their interaction under certain conditions, temperature and so on. That is, we reduce the properties of the complex phenomenon to the interaction between simpler ones. Still, the properties of the complex phenomenon are novel in the sense that they are not to be found at the level of the simpler ones as such. No single molecule is fluid, for example. A good explanation by reduction also allows us to show how the higher level phenomena emerge as characteristic features of the complex phenomenon, and moreover, how these properties may in turn influence the behavior of the more elementary ones. So reduction and emergence are two directions in which we can and should travel the single staircase of scientific explanation. Some other instances are listed here. Take money, for example. It is the development of trade, elementary, that gives rise to the emergence of money, and the role and emergence of money can be explained in terms of the elementary properties of trade. But once money is on the stage, it changes the way the economy works in fundamental ways. So we can and should look at explanations in the language sciences in a similar way, attempt to reduce its properties to more elementary features of cognition and communication, showing how it can have emerged from these and also how it subsequently influences them. Besides such a commitment to explanation, empirical scientists also have a commitment to evidence, to facts as we can observe them. So lexical sociologist Dirk Gerards, already mentioned by Magda, once unequivocally and sort of bluntly maybe for some, stated this as follows: the primary fact of linguistics is the behavior of language users. The label cognitive sciences that we often use these days for our fields may not immediately suggest this, but I think in a sense it is a truism, since cognition itself is not directly observable. Even expressing a linguistic intuition is a type of behavior. But more importantly for my purposes today, this allows us to make a direct link to the explanatory staircase. Human communication, communicative behavior, is a more elementary phenomenon than language. Many more species than us have it, and it may be expected to enter into explanations of language phenomena. Moreover, human communication also has to be recognized as a special case of communicative behavior of organisms, and thus the study of language ultimately also has to be seen as a special case of the study of animal communication, which is a major component of the field of behavioral biology, formerly known as ethology and before that as animal psychology. The commitments to scientific explanation and to evidence thus straightforwardly imply a biological commitment, as I call it here, for us as linguists, in my view, in the sense that our explanatory projects should satisfy general criteria for explanations in behavioral biology. Now, fortunately for us, it so happens that there is general consensus in that field, despite many theoretical controversies and methodological controversies that also exist there, about the proper model for explanations. And this consensus can be traced back to an article by Nico Tinbergen, published in 1963, so 60 years ago now. Because of its importance to the field of ethology, its 50th anniversary was widely celebrated 10 years ago. Tinbergen's article was a response to rather heated debates and controversies in the field of behavioral biology of that time, which included fights even over the proper way of doing science. And the interesting historical thing about it is that Tinbergen's paper was a great help in overcoming these controversies. The first rhetorical step that he took was to formulate the question, the aim of ethology, of behavioral biology, in such a way that nobody could disagree. What behavioral biologists try to do is to answer the question why an animal is doing the things it does, behaves in the way it does. Taking an example from Tinbergen's own work, why is this young seagull picking at the red spot on another bird's beak, in fact, at any red spot? But the most important contribution that he made was what he had to say about the nature of the proper answer. That is an explanation of the behavior, an answer to the why question. The point is that the biological explanation of such a feature, a behavioral feature, can, as a matter of principle, never exist of a single causal story. It has to be a composite one, comprising 4 different types of because clauses, so to speak. Hence the label Tinbergen's 4 whys in the field of, for this model of explanation in the field of behavioral biology. So the first one, the first type of answers concerns the mechanism. The animal is doing this because it perceived something, this was processed by its cognitive system in some way, and then something was processed as a result in its motor cortex, sending a signal to certain muscles, and so on. That is the mechanistic. The second is about ontogeny. A fertilized egg doesn't have any, display any behavior. So another question, answer to the why question, is that the animal has developed in such a way that it displays this behavior and may lose it again in a subsequent stage, for example. The third specifies the function of the behavior. In biological terms, the animal is doing this because it contributes something, so what exactly it is has to be specified, to its survival and its chances to reproduce. In the seagull case, getting food from a parent. And the fourth, finally, is the evolutionary story, phylogeny. The animal is doing this because it is descendant from a lineage of ancestors that has evolved the disposition or possibility to behave this way. In biological publications, the first 2 kinds of stories are commonly grouped together as proximate causes and the latter as ultimate. What this reflects is a fundamental distinction between causality at the level of individual organisms and at the population level. Not only phylogeny, but also function has the effects of a trait's contribution to fitness, has effects on the next generation. That's how it's defined. The distinction between these 2 dimensions of biological explanations is a consequence of the radical conceptual shift that was implicated in the discovery of evolutionary theory by Darwin. What Darwin discovered was not just natural selection, but especially a new kind of gradual change that nobody had thought of before. First of all, we have variation in a population of replicating entities, such as organisms. And secondly, selection in the sense that a variant F has some feature that has some higher chance of being replicated than others. It is, and we have then third, at least some degree of heritability of those features. Then Darwin realized it is inevitable that in the relative frequency of F in the population over generations will increase. Thus, evolution came to be understood as the change in relative frequencies of variance in a population over generation, an algorithmic process that can and will work when these three conditions are met without any intentional agent planning it, as with natural selection. Now, the fact that evolution is not pre-programmed is the background of a catchphrase frequently encountered in textbooks, namely that only populations evolve, the only role of individuals in the evolutionary process is to be selected. No individual dinosaur ever became a bit more bird-like in its lifetime. This makes evolution a process of gradual change that is fundamentally different from that of the development of an individual organism, which is guided, at least to a certain considerable extent, by properties of the fertilized egg that starts out, and where we speak of growth and life history, concepts that have no application in phylogenetic explanations. So as a consequence of the discovery of the theory of evolution, a fundamental split has occurred between the conventional meanings, as I indicate here, of the word evolution on the one hand and the word development on the other hand. Now, in biology, population thinking permeates the whole field. It is the concept of evolution in this sense that provides the conceptual framework creating coherence in the field with all its specializations, as expressed in this famous Dozansky quote. And as we have seen, the Tinbergen model of explanation also incorporates population thinking as a crucial element. Each of the four explanatory quadrants that we have here exhibits this reduction and emergence character of scientific explanations, and so does the framework as a whole, allowing for that, with the quadrants focusing on elementary processes that interact with each other on different timescales. So, given a biological commitment of language, which I argued for, what do we get when we try to apply this model of explanation to language? Now, for several aspects, this seems pretty straightforward. We can formulate the basic question that all linguists are interested in answering as, why do speakers say the things they do in exactly the way they say it? So as a special case of the general explanatory question of behavioral biology. And when we turn to proximate individual level why question, the mechanism quadrant can be implemented by involving the relation between a communicative situation, some observable behavior, the way this is processed in the brain, etc. And in the case of ontogeny, of course, we are especially dealing with the object of language acquisition research. But a complication arises when we turn to the question of ultimate population level explanations, because we are dealing with learned behavior that is transmitted culturally, not genetically. Human languages are not the only vocal communication systems that are transmitted through imitative learning. I listed some other species that exhibit this here. Cultural transmission of behavioral patterns leads to cultural rather than genetic evolution, another instance of Darwin's algorithm along with genetic evolution. For example, we find dialects of chaffing songs, repertoires in Europe that can all be characterized as cases of descent with modification, to use Darwin's terms, with considerable behavioral differences between groups of the same species, that is biologically still the same species. So in cases like these, including human languages, we are dealing with not just one, but two interlocking population level processes. From these two, it is no doubt cultural evolution that primarily explains the properties of languages as we encounter them and words on repertoires, if only because it operates at a shorter timescale than genetic evolution. So we have to take into account, in thinking about a Tinbergen model of explanation for linguistics, that actual languages are not just the product of interactions between individuals and their physical environment over many generations, but also of cultural evolution, glossogeny, as Jespersen and Fitch called it. In our Tinbergen model, this implies that the functional explanation of a linguistic feature will have to deal with its contribution to communicative success, determining its chances of being used again, and the evolutionary one with the history of the language. And I will get back to both of these a little bit later. But several features of languages, given these two population level processes, may in fact be expected to have resulted from the co-evolution of genes and culture. Once something a bit language-like is on the scene, the availability of this new tool for communication changes the fitness landscape, so to speak. One important candidate for such a process is the fact that language use is energetically cheap, while it is at the same time reliable and relatively stable. It supports efficient and effective communication within a cultural group, also with non-kin, genetically unrelated individuals, as Herford, Fitch, and others have repeatedly noted. This combination of features is somewhat unexpected from a purely individual, focused Darwinian perspective and in need of a special explanation. But in linguistics, we have the tools, we have the building blocks for that. As we all know from our basic introduction to pragmatics, the primary explanatory principle of human communication is that of cooperation, analyzed by Grice. The way people normally interpret the communicative behavior of other people only makes sense when we assume that they implicitly expect each other's contributions to be cooperative. In a strictly individualistic Darwinian perspective, this is a risky attitude, so it will not easily evolve. But within human groups, members share a basic trust in each other, and if they don't, the group dissolves. It is this context that allows language use to be cheap and reliable at the same time, as Herford in this work, in this quote, and others has noted. The competition is in general a barrier to cooperativeness, and competition is Darwinian, from a Darwinian perspective, basic. So it has actually only evolved a few times in the long history of life on Earth. But when it did, it had spectacular consequences for the further history of life, because the cooperative collectives became a completely new kind of individual entities interacting with the environment and undergoing selection. This is why the famous book that describes and analyzes these events has major transitions in its title. In the human case, it is especially the reliance on the increased reliance on learned behavior in culture that allowed our ancestors to overcome the barrier to cooperativeness. Individuals cannot change their genetic makeup, but they can relatively easily, more easily, change their behavior if that is learned. That makes it easier to start exploiting the benefits of cooperation under certain conditions, such as hunting large prey and distributing labor in complex projects. In turn, this has led to large differences between human groups that are not based on genetics. Once such a way of life is present, it constitutes a niche for further genetic adaptation, especially for social cognitive infrastructure, as Tomasello has called it, that is a psychological tendency to want to be like others in the group, and to rapidly and reliably find out and learn systematic of behavior in one's group. Especially for children, their survival depends on it. It thereby also produces the conditions for the emergence of conventionality. And conventionality is a basic characteristic of languages. And the emergence of conventionality has been analyzed in depth by David Lewis in 1969 in this monograph. In his analysis, a convention is a special kind of behavioral regularity in a community that provides members with tools for solving a coordination problem, and human communication is such a type of problem. A simple example of a coordination problem is traveling on the same road, two people traveling on the same road in opposite direction, so each has to choose which side to take to avoid collision and continue the journey. It is a coordination problem because the optimal choice for one depends on the optimal choice for the other and the other way around, vice versa. So in the absence of a salient solution, there is a chance of a deadlock. But once a choice has successfully been made, the specific solution adopted thereby becomes more salient and increases the chances of being adopted again. In addition, when one observes others in a community solving such a problem in a particular way, that will also increase its salience and chances of being adopted. And ultimately, the ever-increasing frequency of a particular strategy makes it become the expected one. And that is when we have achieved the status of a convention, an expected regularity. People fearlessly drive towards each other at dangerously high speeds. In other words, in general word terms, a convention is a mutually expected solution to a recurrent coordination problem in a community that facilitates cooperation in solving problems and effectively enhances it, that's the capacity to solve it. It is inherent to coordination problems that there are several solutions that are basically equivalent. If one specific kind of solution would intrinsically be optimal, that would be the one that people adopt. And we do not call it then a convention, but just the best solution. This is the source of arbitrariness of a convention. We conform to a convention just because everybody else in the community conforms to it. We expect everybody to conform, and we know we are ourselves expected to conform. But we are prepared to behave differently when we find ourselves in a different community with a different convention. Driving on the right side or the left side of the road works equally well as a way of solving the problem of passing one another quickly. The choice is entirely dependent on the community that we happen to find ourselves in. Linguistic signs exhibit just these properties. Using zee for the concept sea and meer for the concept lake works just as well as the other way around, as long as everybody in the community does it in the same way. The meaning of the forms is entirely dependent on the question whether we find ourselves in the community of speakers of Dutch or of German. What Lewis' analysis also makes clear is that conventions are a population level phenomenon, as Keller, who wrote this well-known book, and partly based on Lewis, also emphasizes. The study of the emergence and change of linguistic conventions as pursued in historical linguistics thus fills the cultural evolutionary quadrant in our Tinbergen model of explanation. In this perspective, we can characterize a language as a repertoire, a population in the technical sense, of conventional devices for mental coordination in a particular community. Not only comprising words, but also morphemes and constructions or rules of grammar, whatever your preferred terminology. It implies a fundamental distinction between linguistic conventions as a social, cultural phenomenon and knowledge of language in individuals, while recognizing that these two levels are still causally connected. Individual speakers replicate the conventional items with varying frequency, thus driving cultural evolution.
This idea of a difference and the connection between the two is beautifully implemented, in my view, in this recent monograph by Schmidt, in which he uses this visual metaphor of one engine driving two feedback loops. At the community level, it is the recurrent usage that produces conventions, which in turn socially license the use of linguistic items. At the individual level, it is repeated experience that produces cognitive routines, allowing a speaker to produce and understand linguistic utterances. Okay, so with this story so far, relating various existing insights from biology, philosophy, psychology, and linguistics, I claim that we can take major steps towards a Tinbergen model for explanation for our discipline. Linguistic conventions emerge in the process of cooperative communication, which has itself evolved in the context of increasing cooperativeness and its cognitive infrastructure in the history of our species. The model incorporates the crucial conceptual distinction between population and individual level processes of causes and effects. And what I want to do in the remainder of my talk is to discuss some consequences, some of which may come perhaps still as a surprise, and explore some further perspectives. So the general Tinbergen model can be schematically depicted in this way, as I did before. In the mechanism quadrant, the linguistic instantiation includes the study of processing as practiced in psycho and neurolinguistics, also pragmatics, at least as the study of communicative interaction in real time, online. The ontogeny quadrant is mainly to be equated with the study of language acquisition, but also processes, the study of language attrition finds its place there. In the ultimate population level dimension, we are dealing first of all with the conventional function of linguistic signs, which contribute to a language user's communicative success, and also with features of group identity and other aspects studied in sociolinguistics relating to an individual's social success. The fourth quadrant, finally, is concerned with the cultural evolution of language items, language change as studied in historical linguistics, and the emergence of new languages. In addition, of course, the biological commitment implies also that we account for the second population level process of genetic evolution, specifically with the function of language for enhancing cooperation and thus reproductive success of human beings, and the emergence of the human cultural niche in our evolutionary past. Adopting this line of thinking may seem natural by now, I hope so at least, to some extent to you, but it has some surprising consequences in other respects. You may have noted, for example, that the study of grammar is absent from this overview of subdisciplines that I just presented. The reason is that the study of the way linguistic items can and cannot be combined in utterances refers to two very different things when we systematically distinguish between the population and individual level processes. At the population level, grammar denotes the regularities of behavior in a community, the set of conventions that define ways for proper conventional patterns of combination. It may be equated with Chomsky's notion of e-language, external to an individual, although Chomsky meant it a bit differently. It is this kind of information that one usually finds in so-called descriptive grammars, books with titles of the type A Grammar of X. At the individual level, the word grammar denotes the cognitive resources, including routines, memorized chunks, and so on, by which a particular language user performs the task of producing and understanding utterances in a way that the chances of communicative success are optimized. Her I language. I for internal. These resources may in fact include routines and habits that do not necessarily correspond to the community level conventions. In fact, variation in these systems between individuals is completely tolerable as long as the actual communicative behavior of speakers with different internal grammars converges on the patterns defined by the community's conventions to a sufficient degree. Recent work has been now systematically shown that there is actually a considerable amount of individual variation in grammatical knowledge. Now, on the one hand, this may seem to complicate the life of grammarians, but I actually think that embracing this distinction offers only advantages, including for our general goal of overcoming unnecessary divisions between approaches in linguistics. I'm now thinking in particular of the distinctions between levels of explanation that are probably better known among and established among cognitive scientists than Tinbergen's, namely those introduced by David Marr in 1982. Marr proposes a general model for the explanation of information processing systems. So that only concerns the mechanism quadrants in our Tinbergen model. In the first philosophical chapter of his book, Marr gives the simple example of doing addition, mapping sets of numbers onto other numbers as a specific way to illustrate the basic point, before discussing his actual topic, namely vision, the second one mentioned here, which crucially involves the mapping of two-dimensional arrays of pixels to a three-dimensional knowledge of what is in the environment. Language is also mentioned in this chapter as involving a mapping from message to some observable product, and I will get back to that. But the point here is that Marr's general point, and those are his levels, is that a proper explanation within this information processing approach of any individual system must consist of a connected story at three levels, as he calls it. The first concerns an explicit characterization of the nature of the task. What is it that this information processing system is doing? The second concerns the question how the system is doing it, representations and algorithm. And the final level, it is shown how this algorithm is physically implemented in hardware, so to speak. But take the simple example of addition. The theory answering the question, what is the task, is the theoretical mathematical definition of addition, comprising the successor function and some axioms, such as that the result of adding 0 is the same as x, and so on. But at the how level, choices have to be made. Representations have to be chosen. Are we representing numbers binary or in a decimal system or some way else? And we have to choose an algorithm. In what steps are the elements of the representation manipulated? And finally, it has to be shown how the representations and the algorithm are implemented in semiconductors or neurons, for example. The elementary point is that which even this simple example illustrates, is that there are constraints between these levels, but the specification as one never determines the other. There are always choices to be made. In particular, the theory at the what level does not determine a specific representation, and it is not itself an algorithm. It is not a mental, let alone a physical implementation. Still, it is needed as part of a whole explanation, because it tells us as scientists why an algorithm contains certain steps and not others, for example. In the case of vision, it's much more complicated. That's Marr's actual case, but it has the same logic. At the what level, we have to specify what the mapping between two-dimensional image and a three-dimensional model consists of. At the how level, we have to make choices about the manner of representation and algorithms for design in the case of robotic optics vision, and investigate it empirically in the case of organisms. And finally, it must be shown how this is all implemented. And in the case of the scientific study of vision in organisms, the exact nature of vision at the what level is itself an empirical matter. Vision is itself an evolved feature. For example, at the early stages in the evolution of the vertebrate eye, no full model of a 3D environment could be produced. So in terms of the Tinbergen model, we can say that the specification of the present function of the visual system, which is itself a product of evolution, provides the content of the abstract mapping function in the mechanism theory. Having a three-dimensional model of the environment, after all, contributes to the fitness of an organism, and that is what the cognitive mechanism, the information processing system, produces. This link holds for all evolved cognitive functions, unlike the universal abstract mathematical definition of addition. When we turn to language, the same logic applies again. At the what level, the specification of the mapping between an observable signal and a change in mental state will have to comprise at least an abstract theory of cooperative communication and an equally abstract characterization of links between form and meaning in the language evolved, that is, a grammar in some sense. At the how level, choices have to be made, as in the other cases, about the kinds of representations and the algorithms being used. At the physical level, well, we used to have only neurons to think of, but since the rise of large language models, we may perhaps also consider these at least partially an implementation of some features of language. Now, I take the idea of an abstract theory of cooperative communication as a characterization of the task model rather than a processing model from this paper by Thurs and Rubio-Renondez, which I found in general quite useful for clarifying Mar's distinctions. But I want to focus now on the grammar component. Mar makes some interesting comments, brief but interesting, in this philosophical chapter, referring to Chomsky's aspect. He calls it a true computational theory in his sense, that is, a theory at the what level, not at the algorithmic level. The specification of which is, in his words, a completely different endeavor. He relates his distinction to Chomsky's distinction between competence and performance, although, as he notes, Chomsky's characterization is a bit different. But we can indeed find statements in Chomsky's work that support Mar's interpretation. In particular, Chomsky's equation of grammar with a device relating semantic to phonetic representations in combination with the statement that such a device is not itself a theory of the way language users construct such mappings. It is only a theory at the what level. In view of what I have said so far, it should be clear that I think that making a distinction in this way makes sense and is very useful. But what I do want to propose, analogously to what I said previously about the what level of vision, is that when we embed Mar's distinctions in the Tinbergen model, we can actually take the description of a community level grammar as the specification of at least part of the task model in an explanatory account of language processing. The task model is thus not itself represented in the mind of speakers, which seems to me in the spirit of Mar's characterization of the difference between these two levels, and which I find useful. The descriptive grammar is thus not something separate from the theory of linguistic cognition. It is a crucial component linking the population level function to the individual level mechanisms. In short, I conclude first that Mar's model of explanation of information processing can be completely incorporated into the Tinbergen biological one for behavior that I discussed. In fact, in a way that provides additional insights. And secondly, I want to argue that all theories of mental grammars have to account for both what and how at both levels. There is ample room for debate and discussion and controversy on both of these levels, given the complexity of the language phenomenon, no surprise. But it should not be obfuscated by a confusion of the levels. So by way of overall conclusion, I would like to point out, indeed, it's been implicit in the past, that the Tinbergen model is the all-inclusive one, providing a comprehensive conceptual framework for linguistic subdisciplines. And in fact, I would say, for the study of human culture and cognition more generally, because it incorporates this distinction between population and individual level explanations in a fundamental way. And scientists, linguists included, can only achieve results and make progress if they can build on each other's results. And to that end, they have to be able to make sense of their fellow scientists' stories. I claim that that's what I want to claim, that a story of the type that I try to develop here can be of great help in that respect. No subdiscipline in our domain can claim to be the theory of language, while each has an indispensable contribution to make to the overall explanatory enterprise that we share, and that is aimed at answering the question, why the things that speakers say exhibit the characteristics that they do. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Arie, for this wonderful talk. Thanks so much. Now the paper is open to discussion, so any questions, comments are most welcome, and the mic will circulate round.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very interesting talk. Manfred Krifka, my name. I wanted to point out that there is a similar domain type structural parallels, namely our way of dealing with quantities and numbers. There is a large research on how even animals like pigeons, for example, deal with quantities and numbers, and of course in many societies, ways of dealing with numbers, with quantities have developed. Now we can observe this, how people do this actually, how counting systems develop and so on. But on the other side, we have the formal study of these systems in mathematics. And in some sense, the discovery of properties of number systems in mathematics corresponds to what grammarians do. They sort of look at these systems that was in some way or other have developed and look at their formal properties that are not even accessible, or people that do count and add and subtract are not aware of them. And I think there is an interesting structural similarity in a system that is maybe not quite as complex as our linguistic system.
There are undoubtedly more. I just wanted to stick to the examples in the literature that I was, for reasons that they are in the literature, and I'm hoping that more people would know them. But you're absolutely right that there are several, many actually, of these kinds of systems. The thing that I wanted to stress and bring out specifically here for our cases is the question of the need to distinguish these levels is not the same as the difference between mathematic and formal specification and actual implementation. Some of these systems, the definitions of the what level are not necessarily mathematical.
Thank you, Arie, for this talk. I'm John Dubois from University of California, Santa Barbara. I was very interested in your discussion of all these levels of explanation, but to focus particularly on the question of populations, which I think is, of course, very important for an evolutionary approach. The question is, what are these populations of? And I think one interesting level to map the concept of organism to, populations of organisms, would be populations of utterances. So an utterance being something, a behavior, a use of language in a particular context. But another level of population that might be of interest, closely related to that, would be the population of constructions for a given language. That's a little bit more grammaticized and reified into the historical development of the specific language system. So I wonder if you could comment then on the role of the population concept in your evolutionary approach and how it might apply either to utterances or to constructions or perhaps to both.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you're indeed completely right that it's one thing to have a population level concept and recognize it's important for the field, and it's another thing to identify populations. So what are as relevant to be distinguished as a separate level of study and explanation in the overall theoretical framework. So actually the same thing happened in the history of biology. In the case of language, it's at least clear that we have to at least recognize a population, at least the difference between two explanatory, independently recognizable levels of speakers forming communities that are communicatively isolated from each other, that play a role in the language process, so to speak, and the level of utterances, of maybe not utterances, but I would myself say, I tend to think that the most fruitful one to start with is the level, precisely the level of science. So a population of, in construction grammatical terms, constructions, where for meaning combinations, so units of information that are available and can be combined in different ways in actually creating utterances. But there is an alternative view. Bill Croft suggested the idea of taking utterances at the population and comparing the constructions to genes in the DNA framework. On the other hand, it may not be so different because biologists also speak in geneticists of gene pools as mapping onto populations of individual organisms. And they sometimes are not sort of in between whether these are two have to be distinguished in an explanatory story, or whether one can be entirely reduced to the other in the whole story. So there is a lot of research and thinking, and that's the ultimate point and theory building and building explanations to be done to fill in, so to speak, what the most useful ways of constructing actual populations in actual explanatory stories should be.
One last short question.
Hello, thank you very much for this very inspiring talk. First of all, I would like to get the big picture on how we transmit the science of linguistics to other sciences like chemistry, how we explicate this as linguists to other colleagues of other disciplines. And I fully agree with you that, oh, you don't hear me, yeah. I fully agree with you that as linguists, we don't do enough to explicate our science to people of other fields like economists or managers or businessmen. And this introduction for the big picture was really inspiring for us. I'm a postdoc student here at the University of Athens, and I'd like to ask you regarding how you introduced the Mars theory on the mechanism of proximate. So you mentioned that on all these levels of evolution, we can also fit in the Mars theory, which has to do with formalities, I guess. But I work on bilingualism, and in bilingualism, we combine language attrition with information processing in order to get some outcomes, or even language acquisition. And I would like to ask you, how is it possible to move the theory one step ahead and also include Mars formalities to language acquisition and especially language attrition? Thank you very much.
I may not have gotten your question completely. It was a bit hard to hear, to understand. But was your question about bilingualism? So how to incorporate that in the overall story? The formal aspect. Okay, got it. Okay, yeah, that is actually a very good and intriguing point. To think about the consequences of specifying this what level question when we are dealing with an individual who has more than one language at their disposal. Right? I hadn't thought of that in preparing, but I immediately see the relevance of why that is relevant to the overall story, how that can be made relevant to the overall story. So we're dealing with aspects of a community that's of two community grammars. Those are distinct. We have two grammar books for each language, but we have a communicative situation where speakers have multiple of those at their disposal. So what exactly should be the specification of their task if we're doing mechanistic explanations in that? Actually, I think I have to thank you for bringing that to my attention as a relevant point that complicates the whole story. The abstract story stays the same, I think. Okay, thank you, we agree, great. Then let's keep it at that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Let's thank the speaker again for this wonderful plenary address. And now it's time for the coffee break in the other building, and sessions resume at 11. Thank you. All the coffee breaks are in the other building,
Oh.